Hello there. Today I'd like to taste a wine and tell you a story about a winery that has literally risen from the ashes. So the wine I have here is a rather elderly Napa Cabernet Sauvignon. It's the 1993 vintage of Wing Canyon Estate Cabernet Sauvignon. So this is from Mount Veeder. Mount Veeder is to the west of the Napa Valley on the eastern slopes of the Mica Mountains, and the Mica is the range that divides the Napa Valley from the Sonoma Valley in the west. And Wing Canyon sits somewhere above Yountville in the hills there. Now the Mount Veeder AVA, American Viticultural Area, was actually founded in 1993, so the year that this wine was made. And the AVA encompasses a 15,000 acre region that's renowned for being steep, rugged terrain, primarily producing Cabernet Sauvignon, but with other Bordeaux varieties, and the region is known for having some of the lowest yields in the Napa Valley. Now the property's viticultural history dates back to the 1860s. Evidently, Captain Stalham Wing, after whom the canyon is named, was a former sea captain who came to the Napa Valley in 1883 and settled on Mount Veeder, and he is regarded as one of the early pioneers of viticulture in Napa. And the first Mount Veeder wines are recorded in 1864 when Wing entered 6 bottles for judging into the Napa County Fair. The current iteration of the vineyard is entirely separate. It was founded in 1983 when Bill Jenkins, his partner Kathy Dennett, moved here. Bill had purchased a 160 acre parcel of land on Mount Veeder and cleared part of the hillside to plant about 9 acres of vineyard. It took a while to clear the land, and plantings took place in 1987. He planted Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc and a small plot of Chardonnay, and I'd advise you, if you ever come across Wing Canyon's Wild Fermented Chardonnay, it's a wine that really can't be passed by. You have to try it. It's a wine made in tiny amounts, but that can have wonderful balance and intensity. The site that Bill chose is about 350 to 450 metres above sea level. So the vineyards here were situated above the fogs that frequently protect Napa from strong morning sun. The vineyard's soil type are something called Felton gravelly loams. Felton series soils are deep, well-drained soils that are formed from weathered sandstone and or mica schist. The vineyards have an average slope of 20 degrees, and rainfall here can vary quite widely from year to year, between about 750 millimetres a year and 1,500. Now the winery building was completed in 1991, and Bill had made its walls entirely out of a rammed earth construction. 1991 also saw them make their first vintage, producing 380 cases of wine. Moving on several years, the winery, the house here, and quite a large area of the vineyards were destroyed in a forest fire that hit this area in October 2017. This was a fire known as the Nuns Fire, and it was part of a catastrophic series of fires that raged through Northern California beginning on the 8th of October. Now, Bill and Kathy had to evacuate the property on the 10th of October, being fortunate to get out unharmed along with their dogs. Now, the damage here included the destruction of the house and the winery, with only the rammed earth walls left standing once the fire had passed through. Also lost was the entire of the 2017 vintage, which had been fermenting on the winery porch when the fire hit. Unfortunately, Bill and Kathy also lost all their library stock of back vintages, plus their current sales stock. Of the vineyards, a little under 6 acres of the vines were destroyed, leaving them with about 3 acres remaining. Now, Bill and Kathy actually completed their rebuilding of the house and the winery in 2021, being one of the first of the affected wineries to achieve that, replacing the old structure with modern, eco-friendly, prefabricated buildings that actually were designed by Kathy's brother Alan. And one of the gains here was in sustainability. They believe the new winery is somewhere up to 4 times more energy efficient than the previous one. The rebuilt winery remains tiny. And while they lost much of the vineyard, they've been able to continue producing wine from those vines that remained. They've done some replanting, and I believe Bill may also buy in some fruit, but I'm not sure about that. Now for California, the 1993 vintage was pretty average. It's not a vintage people get particularly excited about. There was a wet winter that brought some much needed rain following a period of relative drought. But unfortunately heavy rain impacted on May and reduced crop size. And the following summer oscillated between hot and cool weather, with the grapes really only starting to ripen in August, and at that stage the sun's heat really did take hold, and actually quite a number of producers harvested probably earlier than ideal because they were worried about the rate at which sugar was accumulating in the berries and they didn't want them to become overripe. However, September brought cooler conditions and actually enabled a longer ripening period, so areas such as Mount Veeder and Wing Canyon profited from that, being sort of cooler and higher and being slightly less advanced in their ripeness. And as a result, I think Wing Canyon in 93 avoided some of the slightly green touches that less ripe Cabernet Sauvignon has introduced into some of the wines. Merlot also tended to be affected both by the heat, but also some of the Merlot was hit by rot. So the vineyard here, as I say, is about 8 or 9 acres of west-facing sloping vines, with some plots steeper than others. Average vine age in 1993 was of course about 6 years, so these are still relatively young vines. Now Bill practices organic viticulture here, although as far as I know was not certified as such. And by this stage, once they were established, these vines were being dry farmed. These days, Bill continues to farm both organically and sustainably. The fruit here was hand-picked, crushed, destemmed, and went into small, open fermenters. And these fermenters were plunged twice daily by hand through a period of about 2 weeks to maybe 16 days of fermentation. Once alcoholic fermentation was complete, the wine was run off into barrel, where it did its malolactic conversion, and then aged for a period of at least 2 years. These were French oak barrels, and the proportion of new oak that Bill uses varies quite widely from year to year, sometimes including no new oak at all, sometimes including quite a large proportion. Now, although this is labelled as a Cabernet Sauvignon, because we're in the United States, there is some leeway to use other varieties and still label the wine as Cabernet Sauvignon. And while I can't find any detail of the blend of the 1993, certainly you'll see the blend for this wine varying between being about 90% Cabernet Sauvignon with single-digit amounts of Cabernet Franc and Merlot in the blend, down to about 75% of Cabernet Sauvignon, with maybe up to 20% of Merlot going in there and the balance being Cabernet Franc. Given what I've said about the 93 vintage, I would imagine there's probably a higher proportion of Cabernet Sauvignon in here, but that's just what I hope is an educated guess. Again, I don't have a firm number for production volume, but it certainly won't be more than about 500 cases. So let's take a look at the wine, shall we? Various things I've read suggest that most 1993 Napa Cabernets should be well past their best drinking. Having said that, I'm hoping for a little more from this wine because it's a wine from Mount Veeder. Certainly, looking at it, there's a fantastic depth of colour. That is a wine that, while it's lost its bright, youthful colour, still has a fantastic depth of ruby colour. Swirling the wine, it's clinging quite readily to the sides of the glass. One thing I would note, however, is that it's only labelled as 13% alcohol, so we should expect there to be quite a good tannic contribution to the body of this wine. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The aromas are rich, ripe, and highly developed. There's some really concentrated black fruit here, moving on to high ripeness red fruit, and there's some really quite lovely lifted perfumes. There genuinely is quite a rich black curranty note to the wine, but that soon moves through into hints of lovely ripe black cherry, and then quite quickly on into notes of black plum, black doris, almost through to damson and bullace, those sort of notes. There are cedary notes, there are underlying notes of earthiness and the dry leaves of a forest floor. As the wine opens out, you get more red fruit notes, sort of red plum, but with a vivacity, almost hinting towards raspberry or actually mulberry notes. The underlying oak isn't obvious and cedary, but provides some lovely vivid notes of cinnamon and nutmeg that are wonderfully in harmony, sitting within the fruit rather than standing out from it. So let's have a taste, shall we? On the palate, there are some really savoury developed notes, leathery touches. Again, those forest floor, dried leaves. But there's also a licoricey core of fruit richness, showing a little bit of high ripeness black cherry fruit, almost moving through into sort of a more savoury black olive note. Rising above that, there are some beautifully silky textured notes, almost floral red fruit perfumes. Hints of roses, mulberry, raspberry. Then on the later part of the palate, I'm getting more dark black plum through to slightly stewed red plum notes. On the finish, there are some slightly more developed notes. There are some delicate mushroom hints sitting alongside the sweet spices. Again, the nutmeg and the cinnamon notes. But those developed notes are still quite delicate. They're coming at the end of the finish. They've not yet taken over the mid-palate. Part of the reason for that is there's still quite a good density of fruit. There's a very fine tannin, but it's quite rich and rounded. It's silky textured, but there is a juiciness coming through. And it's that makes me think actually this wine has some quite good balanced acidity. It's not particularly standing out, but there's a freshness that's just giving that life to those notes of mulberry I've mentioned, to some lively dark cherry notes. The wine has a really nice balance and harmony. And it's a combination of three things. It's those fine, smooth, ripe tannins. There aren't green notes in this. There's acidity that's sufficiently fresh. And finally, with the alcohol at just 13%, it's not overpowering those beautiful perfumes as it might do where it's up at 14% or higher. I'm enjoying the length of the persistent, delicate flavours that are on the finish here. And I'm actually really impressed by how well this wine is holding up. I was a little concerned that by now it might be in serious decline. It's probably past its peak, but I'd say its intensity, its depth of flavour, but also the balance it's derived from its high altitude location in the cool of the Mayacamas mountains has produced an impressive wine that's giving a good amount of lively, vibrant fruit. It's a wine that's been able to age gracefully. Trying this has been a really lovely treat. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, it would be fantastic if you could press the like button. And if you're watching these tastings and you enjoy them, do please consider signing up and subscribing to my YouTube channel. The more support I have, the more I can do with the channel. If you have any friends you think might like to watch, do please feel free to pass the video on to them. I'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. And if you have any questions or comments, please do pop those in the comments box below. I would love to hear what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. I will of course leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine. Given its tiny production, I don't know how much of that will be available, but that same page can also be used to locate other vintages of Wing Canyon's estate Cabernet Sauvignon. Having said that, production does remain small, so it's not an easy wine to find. So if you're looking for it, best of luck there. So thank you once again for taking the time to join me. And I do hope that maybe you'll be able to make some time. Come and join me again in the near future for another tasting. Till then, bye for now.